It's such a pleasure to be here at TOS CON. It's been like 5 years since we met with Craig, and it's my first time here. I hope it's not my last. Thank you for being here, especially because capitalism is always under attack. It's not something that, you know, it's like one battle that you win and then phew, it's over. No, it's always under attack. And right now, especially, there is an opportunity in Cuba, because it's been 62 years that capitalism just doesn't exist over there, and something can be done. That's why I'm wearing this shirt, and I'm also trying to get, you know, more people to follow this conference through technology, so they know that, you know, defending capitalism is defending the freedom of Cubans, is defending the freedom of everybody in Latin America and in the world. So how do we do this? First of all, let's begin by metaphysics that Rand loved. We live in this planet, the pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan used to call it. This planet has been around for the past 4.5 billion years, you know, like turning around. And as I hope most of you understand, we are creatures of evolution. We are the best brains to explain what's going on in the universe so far, as we know. Of course, animals have their conscience as well, but at least us, we can work on abstracts and concepts. So once humans started developing, we have to ask ourselves, so how is it that our fellow humans in the past, 10,000 years ago, were simply cavemen, you know, and like their greatest technology was fire, and they would spend most of the day doing like very basic tools in order to, you know, hunt and survive. And the average age of living was 18 years old, and you could die because of a toothache. And now we have like what? Spaceship, we have internet, we have airplanes, we have math, psychology, neuroscience, medicine, advertising, influencers in Instagram and TikTokers. And where did that all come from, you know? Like did some spaceship came to Earth and just put it out here? And when you think about it in metaphysical terms, the pale blue dot has always been the same, right? It's always the same minerals. The same minerals that we have in our cell phones are the ones that the dinosaurs used to walk on, right? So where did that all come from? And it turns out it comes from the only resource in the planet that is truly, you know, that it cannot go on scarcity. It's the only resource in the planet that it's always renovating itself, that has endless solutions for whatever problems we create, because we always have different problems, right? As when the caveman becomes the modern man, there is an evolutionary process that brings all sorts of issues. And that resource is the human mind, right? The human mind is the only machine that we know of that can take the minerals and the elements that have been on this earth for the past 4.5 billion years and transform it in something new. Now, there's a little particular thing about this human mind. The human mind, in order to, you know, come up with solutions, it needs to be free. And this is what a lot of people don't like. Freedom and liberty for the mind to fail, to innovate, to read books, to move around, to trade, to interact. This is where the problem starts. That some people don't like that the mind is free. And the problem is that when the mind is enslaved, then there's no solutions coming up. Because if you don't have liberty in order to, you know, constantly be asking questions and solving those issues, then you cannot have evolution. And capitalism, free markets, free from lobbies, free from subsidies, free from bailouts, free from anybody designing any restriction on it, is the natural consequence of free minds. Because if we have free minds that are constantly making innovations, we also understand that every single individual is different. And I benefit from individuals that are way smarter than I am, because these individuals put airplanes in my livelihood. They put microphones and medicines and food. And so I cherish the fact that everybody is different. Not only genetically, now we understand that, you know, it's a time where, in difference from Karl Marx, when Karl Marx was writing, you know, psychology was in diapers, like Freud hadn't even started. And now we have neuroscience. Now we understand that genetically, we are designed or evolved to be free, to be unique, right? There's an amazing TV show by the futurist Jason Silva. He's originally from Venezuela, and it's called Origins. And we talk about the origins of the evolutionary processes that have not need any design. Language, money, cultures. These are spontaneous things that go on with nobody designing them. There was no one person that said, you know what? Let's design the English language. Let's design the Spanish language. Let's design money. And he explains in Origins that almost 15,000 years ago, two tribes in Africa decided that instead of killing each other, it was better to trade. And that's the origin of money, like 15,000 years ago, even more than the Homo sapiens itself to be dominant in the planet. And when we let that evolutionary process to come, then we have innovations. Now we have to understand that innovations come whenever there's freedom. It doesn't matter if it's the Silk Road, it doesn't matter if it's the Western world, it could be Latin America, it could be Australia. And in fact, we have to understand something. Freedom and innovations and these evolutionary spontaneous processes are the exception to the rule, even in the Western world. Because the Western world had monarchy, had religion, had Middle Ages for more than 1,000 years after we were, you know, like brought back in time with the burn of the Alexandria Library. So it's not the Western culture that we need to preserve, because the Western culture was all about kings, you know, status quo, having the church, eating a cake and having it too, a lot of taxation, no trade until you pay, and of course slavery. And women, come on, we were too dumb even to vote. So there are things about the West that people want to defend, and I say, no, it is not the West. It is the freedom that happened inside the West to go against the things that were the status quo of the West. And this is not unique to the West. The fight for liberty and freedom and the thrive of common sense, you can find it almost anywhere in the planet. This is an excellent book by Álvaro Vargas Llosa, and it's called Liberty for Latin America. And he traces back history of Latin America for 500 years, which, of course, Latin America is a cherry picking of the West, right? We always grab what we want, and the obligations and responsibilities, no, we always set that aside. But if you analyze it, this is part of the West, of the mediocre West, of the bad parts of the West. Corporatism, state mercantilism, privilege, wealth transfer, politicized law. The fact that instead of cherishing the individual as an end in itself, the individual is always someone that needs to serve the government. And this is common in the West almost everywhere, until, of course, there's evolution coming. And finally, when the Renaissance, that was so cherished by Ayn Rand, started putting the human mind back in the driving seat. And that's when the scientific revolution happened, the medical revolution happened. Women start, questioning if they can have rights, as well as slaves, indigenous people. All this thrive that started happening in the 18th, 19th century is because of that evolutionary process. And we have exceptional cities like Amsterdam, like the Italian cities that were different, and they were havens for people who were escaping. And of course, this country, the United States. And because of this evolutionary process, you have rebels like the pirates, and, rebelling from kingdoms and empires where everything was established. The pirates, of course, they were violent, but at least they tried to portray a society where women, slaves, indigenous people, all the outcasts, under one rule of law, regardless of their gender, their color, the true nightmare of the tribalist groups that we have now in the 21st century, right? They don't understand this, because according to them, if you're black, you can only trade and do with black people, and if you're women, you have to think a certain way. But these guys, they were very pioneers in their time. And actually, the founding fathers were inspired by exercises like the Republic of Pirates in order to say, it doesn't matter what color, gender, nationality, or religion you preach. Like, of course, also Adam Smith and other fathers of the Illustration noted. So because of these rebels that rebel against the established West and the established traditions of slavery and state mercantilism, you have the United States. And it's not because it's the United States. It could have been everywhere. You know, it could have been in Australia or Hong Kong or whatever. But it happened to be the first time in history where it was written down that every individual has the right to the pursuit of their happiness. The pursuit. That means you also are free not to pursue it, as long as you don't take the resources of the others who do want to pursue their own happiness. Now, people say, well, yeah, but there was slavery in the United States. And my question is, where wasn't slavery? Slavery was the norm of the entire human existence since 10,000 years ago. At least because of this experiment, it was written down. And this is what provided that with centuries later, black people and women and gay and transgender can achieve their pursuit of happiness as well. Of course, now pursuit of happiness is pursuit of subsidies, pursuit of welfare, pursuit of lobbies, pursuit of protectionism, pursuit of tariffs, and pursuit of all kinds of things that annihilate that liberty, right? And so, I don't know if you know about Hans Rosling. He was an amazing economist. He has a really good video on YouTube called 200 Years, 200 Countries, and he makes the stats, right, on how we were all poor back then. 9 of 10 people were in poverty. That's why nobody talked about poverty, because it was the standard. Until, of course, the Industrial Revolution and the Scientific Revolution and all these movements start creating wealth. Then someone said, oh, okay, so there's poverty and there's wealth, because now you could differentiate. And what he says is, of course, the countries that establish rule of law, where everybody is equal under the law to pursue their dreams, it doesn't matter, regardless of whatever background, those are the countries that achieve prosperity. Whereas the countries that stayed in this feudal mentality, where the king or the lord of the government or the military dictator, they have to control everything, especially the economy, they stayed back. And this is where the world started to change, regardless of the geographic spot. And you could have slave islands like Cuba, or you could have free islands like Taiwan. And both have an embargo or a blockage from like a world power. One from China, communist China, and one from the United States. But you rather lived in Taiwan, as we will see later. Now, with all this, historical salad that I'm trying to make here, so you can have a little grasp on the importance of understanding capitalism as a consequence of freedom of the mind. When you look at where we have had true capitalism, like really true, like Ayn Rand used to say, right? The unknown ideal, because actually no one knows what capitalism is. When you see these people that were protesting against Wall Street and they talk about capitalism, they understand the state controlling the economy. When you ask Black Lives Matter, they do the same. When you ask the feminist movements, they do the same. People associate capitalism with greedy bastards that are protected by governments from free markets. And you're like, how the hell does that happen? Does this happen? How can people conceive capitalism as its exact opposite, as state mercantilism? Well, it's because we also have handed education to the people who are interested in maintaining us ignorant, the government. We want the government to educate us, but then the government benefits from enlarging itself, and the only way that it can enlarge itself is through fear. Because if they implement fear in your minds, fear that you are not good enough in order to pursue your own happiness because you are too dumb, too poor, too white, too black, too a woman, too a gay person. If you are too fearful, the government solution is, give me your resources and I'll take care of you. And everything is going to be fine, right? So because of this, education has taught people to hate capitalism. And the most funny thing is that we are suffering from a Stockholm syndrome. We are enamored with our captor. Because people say, the government is the guilty one. The government is robbing me. I hate the government. And then you ask those same people, okay, but so the government is robbing you, and who should take care of education? The government. Football, the government. Animals, the government. Black people, the government. Women, the government. Old people, the government. Children, the government. It's like, dude, you are complaining that the government steals from you. And at the same time, your solution is more government. This is something that a 5-year-old understands. Why is it that adults don't? And it's because when we look at history and we really want to find one government that has implemented true and absolute capitalism, we won't find one. In the moment a government is, and I'm not an anarcho-capitalist, I don't have the solution, but what I'm saying is, what Rand said about capitalism, true free market separated from the state, hasn't existed. The best example I have found in history is Margaret Thatcher. And still, okay, and still. So how do we allure to this millennial, centennial mind that is so confused, that has this Stockholm syndrome, that hates capitalism when actually they are pissed with state mercantilism, and they blame the embargo of the US for the Cuban dictatorship, you know, and it's not the embargo that forbids the Cubans from getting out of the island or, you know, owning what they fish or what they farm or, you know, making a political party and present themselves to elections. That's not the embargo. That's the dictatorship. How do you allure to these minds? Well, first of all, I think the solution is in going back to psychology. The problem is not economics. Because if you teach people economics and you put a satellite photo of North Korea versus South Korea, it should be enough, right? And say to people, you see, here, there's no electricity, here, there's electricity. You get it? Capitalism works, right? Okay, next lesson. I wish, you know, it would be this easier. But I think that the answer is not in economics. I think economics is a result of first going deeply psychologically. We are dealing with generations that have been taught by the media, by the state, by their own families, to not have self-esteem, to not trust in freedom, because you're too dumb to be free. You're gonna fail and you're gonna be poor. At least with the state, you're gonna have a little ticket that tells you that you have the minimum, you know? So I think that how we reverse this is, first of all, with science. And I wish I could revive Ayn Rand and take her 23andMe and show her how she's the genetic blender, because I think she would have written amazing stuff about racism and genetics and feminism and how your genetic DNA imprint, it's the solution for all that. You want to cure racism? Make people spit and send that to Ancestry or 23andMe. Because when we all find out that we're a genetic blender, it doesn't make sense that we're hating each other for one single label. I have I think it's like 0.8% African in me. But okay, yeah, I don't look African. What if I did, right? So that's the thing. I think that metaphysics in science, in psychology, is what it's going to make us influence new generations about capitalism. It's not only economics. It's about going back to the psychological damage that these people have been victims of. And when you do that, you stop seeing nationalities. I'm really sad in Latin America whenever I go and I talk to in Argentina or in Chile or in Nicaragua, and they say, well, the thing is that we are Nicaraguans, so our problems only Nicaragua understands. And it's like, no, you're part of the human race. And you're just thinking inside the ridiculous borders that some Spanish conquistadors inherited you 500 years ago. So we're limiting and limiting and limiting the mind with things that make no sense whatsoever. When instead we look at humanity without those invented borders, let it be religious ones, nationality ones, gender, etc., our scope opens. And then what we look at is free humans or enslaved humans. And then you can learn from history. And then you can be empathic, truly empathic. Something that Black Lives Matter is not doing with the Cubans, as the Cubans were not doing, because they're all defending themselves from different sectors. When you look at the world like that, you only find that there are 4 people. There are adders, subtractors, multipliers, and dividers. That's it. And there are redhairs and LGBT community and straight people and fat people and slim people and old people in any of them. Because it is about what you decide to do. Nobody can control the cards that the universe gives you when you are born. Or anybody here chose their parents when they were born? No. In the moment that you're born, you're doomed. You're dealt with some cards. And they are absolutely different, even from the ones of your brothers and your sisters. And so your choice is, am I going to use my brain to solve the problems in life or not? That's it. And with that, you have others. These are people that are handled, difficult cards, but they add to whatever was given to them by choice. You have subtractors. These people also, they could be born in a favela, and instead of, pursuing any dream, they become criminals or gangsters or drug dealers or whatever. Then you have multipliers. These are people who were born in really good parts of the world, not like me, but like Sweden or stuff like that. And so you start from a high bar. And from that high bar, you multiply what was given to you. And you leave the world with more than what's given to you. And some rich fellows act like that. But others are dividers. And you already know these people if you read Atlas Shrugged, the James Taggarts of the world, the moochers and the looters, the ones that are born privileged, and with the privilege that they were given, they just make more disaster. That's it. Now we have to understand, for people who are, concerned with poverty, mental poverty is the mother of material poverty, not its daughter. And the people who are obsessed with equality, income equality, material equality, first of all, I ask, what's the Santa Claus list? When are you guys going to be all satisfied? How many TVs, PlayStations, sneakers, rocket ships, access to Wi-Fi does every single human being has to have for the people obsessed with material equality to be happy? What's the Santa Claus list? And you know what? There is no Santa Claus list. Because as long as there's freedom, every single day a new gadget, a new thingy gets invented that by its logic cannot be immediately distributed to the 7 billion people that are walking in the planet right now. But you know what makes it faster for everybody to get those new gadgets? Markets. And when they're free, when they are not, controlled or restricted by stupid things like nationality or gender or whatever. So there are 3 myths that young people are worried with when they talk about capitalism. We already covered that they don't even understand what capitalism is, but leaving that aside, there are three things. People think that in capitalism, poor people are going to be more poor, and their solution is, let's give away, right? Because they think that material wealth magically will give mental wealth. There's an excellent documentary called Poverty, Inc., and it's about the lords of international aid, the lords of poverty, living in the World Bank, and the IMF, and the UN, and Oxfam, and Greenpeace, and all these organizations with beautiful dreams and horrible results. These are like hopeful hippies. They have spent more than trillions of dollars since the 40s. And through their methods, Haiti keeps being Haiti, and kids keep dying of malaria in Africa, understanding that it's trade what really aids, not aid. Even Bono from U2, who has been 3 decades, giving away money in Africa, now says, oh no, it's markets. Because with markets, people are not victims. They become entrepreneurs. And actually, this aid is disastrous because it interrupts the market cycles that can be going on in that country. So this is the first myth to that centennial, millennial, super empathetic generation that is so concerned about the poor in the capitalist mentality. The second one is consumerism. Young people think that capitalism means materialism, cluttering. My father passed away last August, and I had to go back home to, take everything away from the house. And, oh, wow. How can I tell you that cluttering has nothing to do with capitalism or with free trade or with free minds? There is no reason, and I think that after the pandemic, this will be coming to question. Markets are empowered by the minds. If we're dealing with stupid minds, we're going to have stupid markets. And people are going to cherish stupid things. It's just logic, right? I went to Hong Kong in 2019, and I was walking in the markets as the capitalist that I am. I mean, you don't get more capitalist than me. And I was walking around, and after a millionth store with Hello Kitty plastic dolls, I was thinking, do we really need another of this? Like seriously, as a humanity, who am I to judge the dreams of a 5-year-old girl? But you start wondering, why are we producing the things that we produce? And then I go back to psychology. We are going to cherish whatever in our mind is valuable, right? The paradox of the diamond and the water. So if we want healthier markets, cleaner markets, greener markets, we need cleaner minds, greener minds, healthier minds. And there's an excellent documentary where actually T.K. Coleman, who collaborates with Fee, it's interviewed, something that we should say, yes, Netflix is taking into account this side of the story. Because it's not about cluttering. It's not about materialism. It's about creating true wealth. And now we are the generation that has science in its favor, medicine, neuroscience, psychology, common sense, pollution as a challenge, to understand that if we don't like the markets that we're seeing, we have to change the demand so the offer changes, not the opposite. And this has nothing to do with protect national industries or put tariffs. No, it's not about borders. It's like, let people be free, but free in every single sense, even in education. And the other thing that centennials and millennials are super worried about is that the planet is going to end tomorrow, okay? I really pity Greta Thunberg. I think it's horrible what they did to this little girl, because I remember when I was a kid, and there was an advertisement in Guatemala television that said, gota a gota. Gota is drop in Spanish. So drop by drop, el agua se agota. Drop by drop, the water is off. And I was like, oh my God, we're not gonna be with water anymore. And if I, look at the sink and it was like, beep, 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 and I was like 8 years old. And my mom grabbed me one day, and it was like raining, and she sat me down, and she said, look, metaphysics, Rand. Of course, my mom didn't do anything about Rand, but very bright. And she said, look, it's raining. As long as there is rain, people have the choice of getting that water and clean it. So no, we're not running out of water. We're running out of hardworking people. And we have a lot of lazy people, okay? And I was like, okay. Okay, Greta didn't have my mom. That was her problem. But she lived in Sweden, right? And they have manipulated psychologically this girl into what I believe that she's really worried. She's genuinely concerned that we are going to end the planet. And no, if you look at the planet has been here for 4.5 billion years. It has been doing amazing without us, and it's gonna do fantastic without us too. So the message that we're imprinting young people is the wrong one. We're not killing the planet, we're killing each other. With stupid mentalities, with excuses to don't trade with each other, but hate each other and make war instead of markets. That is our genuine issue. Not that we're gonna kill the planet. The planet, have you seen that show of what happens after 10 years of an inhabited city and how the nature group? That happens in your backyard. I mean, it's common sense. So we are polluting the mentality of young people with the wrong messages about capitalism. It's not about giving away material stuff. It's not about cluttering. It's not about killing the planet. Capitalism has nothing to do with that. And of course, they also think that capitalist societies are only for white male dudes. And it's like, what? No. Actually, capitalism has been our best friend, ladies, because no one wanted us free. Not the church. The church always thought of us like virgins or Eve. And we're doomed with that option, right? Because if we're Eve and we want to be smart and we want to be intelligent, oh no, that's the worst. Because then you're going to condemn men not to live in paradise. And then another option is have kids but don't enjoy sex and be a virgin, but no. It's like Rand would say, two impossible premises. There's no even contradiction. It's just that it's two impossible premises. So while the church was doing that to us, all the colonial powers also were not giving us rights. Actually, what started emancipating us was capitalism, inventions, the washing machine, the contraceptive pill, the higher education, the hygiene products have done more for us and our freedom than any monarchy or any priest had ever done for us. And that's reality. And you know who has an amazing relationship with sex and psychology and what to do with emotional intelligence and how to empower women and also loves capitalism? Ayn Rand. Why do feminists don't talk about this brilliant, amazing... She has all the checks. She's a woman. She was not that pretty. You know, like, because feminists say that beauty is something that women shouldn't pursue because it's, giving men what they want and whatever craziness, okay? She was a migrant. She was smart. She had the most unpopular ideas. Like, she fits all the feminist boxes. And still, feminists don't use her. And this lady actually had an amazing interview about sex in Playboy magazine, And so this centennial, millennial generation who loves to watch shows about transgender people and, overcoming difficulties like Pose in Netflix and all these shows about, conquering rights, why are they not using her? Well, because nobody in public or private education is going to use Rand, right? So there you have it. So going back to concretes in this metaphysical world of ours. There are also myths. In Latin America, everybody says, the United States, the most capitalist country in the world. It's not true anymore. I am sorry to burst your bubble, but we cannot use the United States as the example of freedom and capitalism. Yes, you once were, but this was like 3 centuries ago. And you have to address the current state of affairs. Because if not, people are using a wrong example of capitalism. And when they get pissed at the wrong things. When people say, for example, Monsanto, the corn company, and you go and see the subsidies that Monsanto has, and why this creates health issues, people don't understand it. When they say the super multi-corporations, they all have subsidies and protectionism. Amazon, Facebook, Tesla. So we cannot refer to the US as the most capitalist country in the planet because it's not anymore. This is the World Index of Economic Freedom, 2021, and even Hong Kong, which I think was the #1 country, they have the housing subsidized. Now here's the thing, the fact that there are more free countries, even if they are not true capitalists, doesn't mean that you're gonna live better in the less free countries. Actually, for people who love to talk about how to end poverty, poor people are 11 times richer, and they live even more than 15 years in a freer country from that index than in the less. But what about moral freedom? So there's a foundation in Spain that now creates the World Moral Index Freedom. And it's not moral like your popes, Catholic popes moral. No. Is your moral like Rand understands moral? How moral is your country in the sense of how do they respect people according to their actions and the consistency of their actions regardless of gender or personal choices. So with these two things combined, okay, when you have this and this combined, we will understand that true free capitalist societies is unfortunately not what we're having right now. Not in the United States, and of course less in Latin America. And I want to end with this because I think that all of these ideas sound beautiful and they're great and they always work, but there are also current state of affairs. And I think that people who defend these ideas, sometimes they lose the opportunity when something is happening on the ground. Well, right now, something is really happening on the ground in Cuba. Cuban people inside the island are doing for themselves what no US president and no Latin American president has ever done for them. And I think this is an amazing opportunity to rethink how are we gonna make this more of a John Galt Valley, Galt's Gulch, than going back also to the 1950s, which is something that also people are obsessed with sometimes when they want to annihilate a dictatorship. They want to go back to happier times. But no, we are in 2021. And we need to understand that we need territories that are really free, taking into account the problems that we have in the 21st century. So this is Taiwan versus Cuba. And if anybody tells you, oh no, what's going on in Cuba is because of the embargo, well, no. Taiwan is in the same position, if you want to see it like that. And still, the PIB per capita of Taiwan is $25,000. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention, and I hope that my broken English and historical salad was very helpful for you. It's been a pleasure.
If the issue was economic and material well-being and standard of living, capitalism would have won hands down over a century ago. As Rand argued, the issue basically is a moral one. And so to argue capitalism's practical efficacy in the absence of a moral argument for its virtuous preconditions, freedom, is not that just playing into the enemy's hands? I'll let you comment on that.
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's where the battle needs to be, at least for the 10 years that I've been alluring young people in Latin America through these ideas. That's what works. Of course, you have to have the economical explanations, yes, but it's this psychological damage and this lack of analysis and critical thinking that you need to put into hand. And it's quite easy. Like when you have very strong and simple metaphysical examples, they do see it. Because most people, they do want to see a better world. I don't think that most people are evil. They have just been taught the evil ways, and they have no alternative because nobody is giving them those alternatives. I wish that all the feminists would have read Rand before becoming feminists, or all the people that are involved with all these racial movements. Thank you.
Gracias, Gloria.
Gracias.
So for me and for, I would assume, a lot of people here, the benefits of capitalism should be as straightforward as you said, seeing the picture of the Koreas. But to a lot of people, it's not so obvious. And I know you've had a lot of success with social media and the likes. And so what I want to know is, how are we able to make these ideas more accessible to the people we love, and ways in which we can help spread the ideas of freedom and liberty across our own circles?
Thank you for that. And it's very important because every individual is unique, and every individual has his or hers or its own talent and its own interests. So I think that you are successful as long as you're fulfilling your passions, right? I don't think Hank Reading would have been as successful if you force him to be a diver and maybe he had claustrophobia, right? We are more successful when we pursue what we love and what we're good at. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, what am I good at? And what do I want to transmit out there? And the second thing that I think is very powerful is storytelling. It's that you become part of the message, the way that you live your life, that you are not afraid to expose yourself as the result of liberty. And exposing yourself as the result of liberty means that you are exposing yourself with the failures, with the achievements, with the whole package, just like musicians do, right? Why do young people admire musician lives? Because they present everything that comes with it, right? So I would start by saying, what am I good at? What do I want to do? And then there are outlets. The Romantic Manifesto, I think it's a great way to start, to understand what is your artistic outlet. Almost everybody has an artistic outlet, right? And thanks to technology, there are more ways to express yourself. Does that answer your question? Okay.
You mentioned you travel to a lot of different countries and have these talks. Do you focus more or less on certain topics when you're going to Nicaragua as opposed to here?
Yes. Yeah, it's the same. Like you're a seller of ideas. And the most common error of sellers of ideas is that they go and impose. And they think that all the audiences are going to understand from their perspective what is useful. So whenever I'm talking with, for example, indigenous women, I don't talk about Mises, or I don't show a graphic. I just go and say, okay, you have 9 malnourished children. Did the state force you to have 9 malnourished children, or was it you, or how did you get there? And then you start empowering people by the things that they're enslaved with. But then you go and talk with crony businessmen in Latin America when they're like, oh my, they always call you like 2 weeks before elections because they think that you're going to get there and magically you're going to spread magic capitalist dust and everybody's not going to vote for the populist in turn, right? And you're like, dude, your father 20 years ago was financing the guy that didn't do his job, and this is the consequence. And you guys as businessmen, as moochers and looters who want privileges, this is what ends up pissing people off in poverty. Because when in Latin America, some people say, he has and I don't have, it's not because of free market and the American dream and everybody being their best version. It's because you have privileges. So there is a logic of why people hate wealth. But going back to your question, yes, if in order to be a good seller of ideas, you listen to your audience. You try to understand what's going on there, right? And this is what I regard as a very intellectual audience that has read more than, I don't know, 90% of the people. So, coming here and quoting Rand would be redundant for me. Yes.
Hola, Gloria.
Hola.
As a Costa Rican, when I saw Spanish in your first slide and your last one, I feel giddy, so thank you for that. Maybe the thing I am most intrigued right now is, given that you want to make a lot of impact in this world right now, what are your projects, the things that you want to do in the next, 5, 10 years, particularly related to Latin America?
Okay, that is a very difficult question because nothing in my life has been planned. I mean, yes, but I plan in a very short term. It was I'm gonna study this career. I have an exam, I study for the exam. But when I chose my career in university, I was not seeing myself 10 years in a row in a job, it was all unraveling. I'm more of a Steve Jobs philosophy in that sense, you connect the dots while you're walking the road. And because Latin America is so difficult, you cannot make long-term plans. It's migrating within Latin America is like changing rooms in the Titanic, right? It's completely useless. The country that is good 4 years is a disaster. Even Chile right now is a hell. But now Cuba is liberating itself. So you're okay, so the one that is saving itself, the other one is going. So you have to adapt. And I think that my plans or my projects are not attached to one particular geographic scenario, but by spreading these ideas. But of course, since I'm half Cuban, I would love to contribute into putting a very small 5 points or 10 points that Cuba could implement, regardless of who implements them, to advance it as a very stable and free island. I would love to spend these New Year's in the island of my family for the first time in my life. I'm working towards that. I'm trying to, do as much as I can for this opportunity to happen, but I also understand that things can change so fast, and you cannot depend on that, and you cannot get disappointed on that.
Thank you, Dagny.
Thank you for that.
I'm excited about industrialists that we have. The U.S., Bezos going up in Blue Origin and the outer frontiers. I'm interested in your perspective as an outsider to the U.S. Some of my concerns relate to it's less statist and more corporate statism impacting our free expression, be it Facebook and all of that. I was wondering, your perspectives on that and what you see as potential solutions.
I absolutely agree with you, and I think that you need to tackle the issue from its roots and on its branches. Because people complain about, censoring in Facebook. I interviewed a fellow Facebook worker 2 years ago at OCON, and he's an objectivist, and he was talking about the lack of multicultural environment inside of Facebook. Basically, you have to be woke, you have to be socialist, you have to be BLM, you have to be now, I guess, pro-Castro, I don't know, in order to fit the model. But then when you go back is, okay, what are the privileges that these companies have? You don't like these companies? Take the lobbies away, take the privileges, take the subsidies, and just let them be. That's the root. But people, they don't go to the root. Once the company is subsidized and privileged and protected, then they want to regulate it according to their own standards, and that's not going to work.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Brown.
Hello.
I was talking to people I know, and whenever I talk about Latin America, they always say, "Oh, well, the Westerners came over and then stole all the wealth."
Stole the wealth.
Yeah, like
Okay,
it was
okay.
there.
Okay, yeah,
before.
yeah, yeah.
How do I go into explaining that these things weren't there before?
Yes.
Like, and how do I explain, like, I don't have specific examples in history
Right.
that, very specific examples. So how would I go about that?
I really, really recommend you to get this book. It's amazing, and it's really good storytelling, and there are a lot of examples, because one of the misconceptions is that people here were like singing Kumbaya, and everything was beautiful, and then the Spanish arrived one day, and Apocalypto happened, like Mel Gibson, you know, smashed like thousands of years in 2 hours. It was not like that, right? First of all, there has to be an understanding that there's no one Latin America. You know, if we are the philosophy of individuals, we really need to understand individually what went on in Latin America. The Incas and the Aztecs never met, and they both taxed their people and enslaved their people. The Mayans, they were extinguished like 900 or 600 years before the Spanish even arrived. So whenever there's this like mythology of, you know, generalizing about Latin American history, it's really bad. Now here's the thing. The fact that today there's, I don't know, an obese American man addicted to Prozac that is created in a laboratory versus an indigenous woman in Peru who is curing cancer with ayahuasca treatments, and this is what they put you, an example of the fail of the West and the wealth of the ancient, is reducing two facts, but taking away the entire history in between. It doesn't mean that it's not true. There is a lot of ancestral knowledge that was completely depleted, and you know by who? By the Catholic Church. So that is the problem, that whenever you really point out about the things that, because as humans, we are all flawed. There is no one good civilization in everything and one bad civilization in absolutely everything. No, all civilizations, because it's a process of evolution and trying and failing and going again. Of course, indigenous people had a lot of good things, but they also had a lot of bad things. And here is the other. When the Spanish arrived, their logic was way different than the Americans coming here. Because the Americans were running away from religious oppression. Right? The Spanish arrived by order of the church, and their order was loot. There was no private property installed. Like here, everything that was installed there was for the crown, extracting. And the wealth, yes, there was gold and silver, but it was on the ground. But I really recommend you that book if you're into that topic. That will solve your issues.
Thank you.
You're welcome. 5 minutes, okay. I'll be quick.
Muchas gracias, Gloria. Me encanta tu energía.
Gracias.
You talked a lot about the psychological damage that we see in a lot of millennials today, and that's certainly true. But I'm always interested in the causes. And so I would think that the main causes of the psychological damage is just state it very broadly, is bad philosophy.
Bad philosophy, yes.
But I was wondering if you could comment on that a little bit more and maybe speak to it in your own experience.
Totally agree, and it's so hard because to tackle bad philosophy, I came to a point where I cannot tackle bad philosophy unless I publicly say that I'm an atheist. And this annihilates 90% of the Latin American audience, because immediately atheist is evil. But then you explain to them, well, what about all the Catholic corrupt presidents that we have had? They all been believers. So I find tools of relief and opening of common sense with humor. You know, I watched a fantastic documentary, and I know I talk a lot about documentary. I promise I also read books. But since this generation is all about fast and quick, and even a documentary is too long right now, I watched a fantastic documentary called Women Who Laugh with Joan Rivers and Whoopi Goldberg and almost most of the stand-up comedians. And I love that the message was, it's not about being a female comedian, it's about a good comedian. When we get there, we're gonna win the battle. But they also talk about how women are not supposed to be intelligent. They're supposed to be quiet, right? And that's it. And then if you're intelligent, but you're so harsh and you don't have humor, these people who believe that they're the good ones and you're the bad one because you're the atheist and you are, you know, capitalist and what's wrong with you, you're not gonna make bridge. But I think that humor is amazing. And I think that Rand did a lot of that, especially when she was asked about God, right? And so I think that humor is a really good tool to bridge that. But I don't see, like, I have a lot of friends who defend free markets, but they are religious. I don't think that that's successful in the long run, because eventually these friends of mine are being captured by the mercantilist right wings and the religious groups in Latin America. And unfortunately, when these guys are in power, they don't implement free market. They implement a state mercantilism, oligarchies, and only capitalism for themselves. So then you have socialism again, right? You're welcome.
Gracias. So when I like your emphasis on storytelling, and when you go to different Latin American countries, do you tell stories of capitalists, like Latin American capitalists? Is that part of what you share?
Only in the abstract. I use it a lot to say that the arrogant bureaucrat sitting in his desk knows nothing about what a woman selling tomatoes in the market can know about the pricing of the goods. I actually did in a Guatemalan market, not from the city, but from a rural area called Santiago Atitlan, very indigenous, very poor, because people were saying like, oh no, Guatemala is so poor and we're worse than Venezuela. And I was like, what? So I grabbed my camera and I went inside this rural market and I started asking prices, and I was asking people like, what is the price of this in Caracas right now? And they would say, well, what price if the product is not here, right? So I try to do that. Like, I try to visualize what's going on. And I go a lot with informal economy. I try to say that the true hero is the little guy, the informal economy, the hangrierdens, but because these guys are not part of that oligarchy having privileges. And there's no more room for the last one. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much for your time and your questions. It's a pleasure to be here.